Bloodlines of the Broken. The night was frigid, but Seraphine was colder. She stalked the city streets, her pale skin hidden beneath a dark, tattered trench coat. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a hunger so deep it consumed her every thought. It had been days since she'd tasted the rush of warm blood, and her patience was wearing thin. She needed to feed or risk losing what little control she had left. The city, with its blinding neon lights and teeming crowds, offered no solace. Everyone moved in groups, rushing to their destinations, oblivious to the predator lurking in the shadows. Seraphine prowled the alleyways, eyes sharp, but tonight the hunt wasn't easy. She turned a corner, ready to give up and retreat to her decrepit apartment when she saw her. A woman stood alone beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp, puffing on a cigarette. She was tall with broad shoulders, her muscular frame barely concealed beneath a leather jacket. Her sharp features were partially obscured by her long, disheveled black hair, and Seraphine's eyes narrowed. This woman was different. Seraphine approached, her footsteps silent. "Haven't seen you around here before," she said, her voice a sultry whisper as she stepped into the light. The woman didn't bother looking at her. She took another drag from her cigarette, blowing smoke into the night air. "It's a big city," she muttered, her voice gruff but calm. Now closer, Seraphine noticed the scars. Jagged, angry marks crisscrossed her arms, some fresh, others faded with time. She even had a long scar running from her cheek down to her jawline. It only made Seraphine more intrigued. "You're not like the others," Seraphine mused, her eyes lingering on the woman's face. "What would it take to get your attention?" The woman finally glanced at Seraphine, her brown eyes narrowing. Her posture stiffened for a moment before she let out a short, dry laugh. "Bold. Thought you'd be some creep. Guess I was wrong." She dropped the cigarette and ground it under her boot. "You want my attention? Buy me a drink." Seraphine smirked. This was promising. "Lead the way." The woman, whose name Seraphine still didn't know, guided her to a dingy bar tucked away in an alley. The place reeked of old wood and spilled beer, the kind of place where patrons preferred to keep their heads down. Seraphine paid for their drinks, nursing her whiskey while keeping a watchful eye on the woman across from her. There was an air of mystery and danger about her, and Seraphine liked that. After a few minutes of silence, the woman finally spoke. "You got a name? Or are we keeping it mysterious?" "Seraphine," she replied, her voice smooth and calculated. "And you?" "Call me Blake," the woman replied, taking a long sip from her glass. "You always pick up strangers in dark alleys?" Seraphine smiled, showing a hint of her sharp canines. "Can't say I do. You seemed special." Blake leaned back in her chair, studying Seraphine with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're not what you seem, are you?" she asked, her voice low and knowing. Before Seraphine could answer, Blake stood up, her jacket shifting to reveal more scars. "My place is a bit far. Why don't we go to yours?" Seraphine raised an eyebrow. Blake wasn't drunk, and she certainly wasn't foolish. Seraphine could sense something deeper was at play, but she nodded anyway. If Blake wanted to walk willingly into the lair of a vampire, who was she to refuse? They arrived at Seraphine's apartment, a dilapidated relic of a time long past. The walls were painted deep crimson, and heavy black curtains blocked out any semblance of light. A few flickering candles provided the only illumination, casting eerie shadows across the antique furniture. "Nice place," Blake commented, her voice laced with sarcasm. She wandered over to the grand piano sitting in the corner, running a finger along the dusty keys. "It suits me," Seraphine replied, stepping closer. Her hunger was palpable now, the throb in her veins a constant reminder of her need to feed. She approached Blake from behind, ready to sink her fangs into the woman's neck when, click, the sound of a gun's hammer being pulled back echoed in the quiet room. Seraphine barely had time to react before a searing pain erupted in her chest, followed by a deafening bang. Seraphine staggered back, hissing in pain. She clutched her chest, glaring at Blake, who now stood with a smoking revolver in her hand. "Damned vampire," Blake muttered under her breath, cocking the gun again. Seraphine gritted her teeth, blood oozing from the wound, but it wasn't over. She was far from dead, and Blake seemed to realize this as her face paled. "You're stronger than I thought," Blake remarked, backing up slightly. "But I've dealt with monsters before." Seraphine snarled, her body aching as she tried to stand. "You don't know what you're dealing with." She lunged at Blake, but the woman was faster than she looked. Blake sidestepped her attack, and before Seraphine could turn, another gunshot rang out, this time hitting her in the shoulder. The pain was excruciating, but Seraphine wasn't done. She kicked the gun from Blake's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. They stared at each other, both breathing heavily. "What the hell are you?" Blake demanded, eyes wide with fear and anger. "I think you already know," Seraphine rasped. She could barely stand, her wounds taking their toll. "But if you wanted me dead, why shoot me? Why not run?" Blake hesitated, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Because I need something from you, and I think you need something from me." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Go on." Blake glanced at the scattered bullets on the floor. "I'll give you some of my blood, just enough to keep you alive. But in return I stay here. Safe. No questions asked." Seraphine blinked, taken aback. "You're insane." "Maybe," Blake admitted, shrugging. "But I figure we can both get what we want, and I'm not eager to become your next meal." The vampire chuckled weakly, the irony not lost on her. "Fine. We have a deal." And so began an uneasy alliance between predator and prey, both bound by a mutual need for survival, and perhaps something more.